There are a number of new reports about the possibility of mandatory military service if Donald Trump were to win in November and return to the Oval Office. Now, officially, Donald Trump has denied this, but the growing number of people around Trump who like the idea, at least in theory, as well as the sort of authoritarian and militarized reality of the Project 2025 infrastructure and framework that Donald Trump would implement if he were to become president, raise some serious questions here. Now, in addition to this, if you remember, if you are a member, you might remember that earlier this week we talked about this Republican bill to automatically register men 18 to 26 in selective service, a process that previously was manual that they want to make completely automated. And of course, when you combine that, even though in practice it doesn't really change too much other than the automatic nature of it, we still don't have a draft despite selective service registration. With the growing number of people around Trump who like this idea, it starts to paint a picture that is concerning in many ways. Mother Jones has an article. Trump world reportedly flirts with a return to mandatory military service. And the article explains that even though Trump was a draft dodger in his youth, remember, he got a very strong letter on the ankles, the bone spurs that he had. The former president's acolytes are reportedly flirting with a return to requiring mandatory military service if he's reelected. Christopher Miller, former acting defense secretary during the last 2 months of Trump's term, and possibly the next leader of the Pentagon, said to the Washington Post, it should be, quote, strongly considered, and referred to mandatory military service as a, quote, rite of passage that would create a sense of, quote, shared sacrifice, saying it reinforces the bonds of civility. Why wouldn't we give it a try? The Mother Jones article talks about Miller previously floating this idea. What about making public school students take the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, which is a test that the DoD developed to match students with particular roles in the U.S. military? Trump calls the reporting completely untrue, says, I never even thought of that idea. But of course, the problem is that with Trump, it's something he hasn't thought of until someone gets up and whispers into his ear, here's something to think about, and then he thinks about it. And the article does mention other people around Trump, including rumored vice presidential pick J.D. Vance, who likes the idea of national service. And I'm not talking about in wartime. He's talking about just mandatory service, no matter what. And Lindsey Graham said he would take no option off the table in terms of addressing shortages in the military. Very, very unpopular. The article notes that a Gallup poll finds that a majority of those who would be affected by a draft are against the idea, but maybe not by the margins that you might expect. So there's a couple of different stories here, as always. Number one, there's the malleability of Trump with regard to ideas. How many times has Trump said, no, that's not something I'm thinking of or doing? And then, of course, a couple people get together. They go, sir, this is really something you should do. And then he does it. We saw it during COVID. We saw it a bunch of different times. Number two, it would be the obvious hypocrisy of Trump with his draft dodging history personally, then looking at something that would even approximate any kind of mandatory military service, which wasn't right for him. But if these people around him convinced him, I guess he would say maybe is right for the modern youth of America. But the real story for me here is the ease with which the modern MAGA movement, the modern Republican Party, or we could say MAGA Trumpism, the ease with which they demand sacrifice from others in so many different ways. Billionaire Trump asking, begging for money for his legal bills and for re-election and for campaign debts. And it's all what benefits him with no regard whatsoever for how the average person is affected. You should sacrifice to put this super wealthy guy in the Oval Office, despite the fact that he said he would self-fund his campaign. And the concept of the rite of passage to create shared sacrifice and civility, you really have to understand how that is all code. That is code that connects to Project 2025. We will discuss this in our forthcoming white paper. Project 2025 wants a more militarized American youth, wants to enhance military recruitment with this mandatory testing in public schools. A lot of this stuff is straight out of Project 2025 and its broader goals that it has. And of course, if you are not just a progressive, But if you're someone who wants not only separation between church and state, but also wants separation between any kind of military involvement forced upon people, like, for example, with recruitment at public schools, you're looking at imposing a military agenda on students. You're looking at trying to redirect them into the military, regardless of whether that's actually what's best for them. You're looking to narrow their career choices by saying you can do absolutely anything you want in the way that we do it in the military and within the scope of how the military looks at a lot of these professions. And so the claim that it would foster civility and unite and whatever ignores all of the ways in which students can do that outside of the military, but also ignores the radicalizing status quo that we've been dealing with in the military, extremism in the military. We've reported on it extensively. So this entire thing is very much misguided. It's imposing a one-dimensional view, which is very well represented in Project 2025, in order to control and to manipulate the next generation, all under the guise of shared sacrifice and patriotism and bringing back bravery and the values of when we, whatever, I don't know what I guess it's the 1950s that they liked the values that were represented. So understand that all of this is part of a bigger plan. The plan is mostly driven by Project 2025 and kind of intermeshed with Agenda 47, which is more specific to Trump, but Trump's the nominee. So it'll be Project 2025 if he wins, and if Biden wins, it won't be. This all is part of this package of how we should view the country and the military that I believe to be completely antithetical to the way that society will progress and advance and improve. So a number of people around Trump concerningly interested in the idea of mandatory military service. As usual, there's one way we prevent all of this stuff. There's one way to prevent Project 2025, one way to prevent anybody even flirting with any kind of mandatory military service. And you all know what it is. It's making sure Trump doesn't step foot in the Oval Office ever, ever again.